Hey guys, welcome to Ben Wrenchin. My name's Ben, and today I'm wrenching on my 94 Chevy K1500. I've got a coolant leak, so I'll talk through how I discovered that, and then I'm going to show you how I changed out the thermostat housing gasket, drain and refill the coolant, and I'll probably do some other stuff while I'm working on it. But that's what I'm after today, so let me show you what I've got. I recently did pretty much the same thing on my buddy's Ford Ranger, and so when I did that, I got some gasket remover and these Carbide gasket scrapers that I really like, so I'm going to use those for this. I got this upgraded thermostat housing gasket. It's got a thicker base and a rubber seal. It's a little more expensive, but I like those because they'll prevent leaks. On the Ford Ranger, I did use a paper gasket the first time. It ended up leaking, so I replaced it with a Felpro brand that's similar to this, and that worked out really well. So I'm going to use that. I also got a new thermostat. It is a GM Genuine part. I don't like to go cheap on thermostats because I've had them bad out of the box before, so I like to go with OEM parts if I can get them. I got some brake cleaner too in case I make a mess, which is probably going to happen. I'll link everything I use down in the description, but I was driving around a few weeks ago, and when I got to a stoplight, I lost heat inside the cabin. I've never had that before, so I thought it was kind of weird. I checked the coolant level at the top of the radiator, and I couldn't even see the top of the coolant line. So I knew I had a coolant leak, and I started looking around, and the first place I looked was at this thermostat housing, and I saw the coolant puddled up like it is right there. So I figured it's got to be leaking from the thermostat housing. It's at least got to be somewhere above or around this area, which is the top of the engine, so I know it wasn't the radiator hoses. The lower hose down there looks dry. The connection on the upper hose looks good. And I don't see anything under the radiator that tells me it's leaking from there. So that leads me to believe that that thermostat housing is leaking. I've been thinking about changing out my thermostat anyway because I've had some weird cooling issues. The temp gauge on the inside of these trucks I know is not super reliable, but it's been getting kind of weird when it heats up. Sometimes it gets a little bit too high and then it'll drop back down, and that seems like it's gotten worse and worse. So I think the thermostat might be going out, but I wanted to change it out anyway, and this will give me a perfect opportunity because I'll be right there. So the housing's just got 2 bolts. It's got one on each side. I'll need to drain some coolant first, but I got a good solution for that. So I'll drain some coolant, pop that off, clean that gasket off, put the new gasket on, new thermostat, put everything back together, and fill the coolant back up. So I'm going to start by draining some coolant. There is a petcock at the bottom of the radiator on the driver's side. Inside the engine bay on the driver's side at the front, this is the radiator, and at the bottom there is a petcock with a spout coming out the side. So I can turn that knob and coolant will drain out of there. I hunted around for a tube that I could stick on that spout and drain it out better. And the first thing I grabbed was my oil pump, and I figured that tube might be close. So I popped this on here and figured out it is about the perfect size for this. I don't even think I need a hose clamp or anything for that. I think it's going to drain out without even leaking from this connection. And then I ran the hose down through the wheel well and out the other side so I can just drain this into my catch pan. So that looks pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and drain some coolant. Now I don't need to drain all of it out, just enough to get the level below that thermostat housing. And that way when I take this off, there isn't going to be coolant spilling all over the top of the engine. So I'm going to grab some pliers and turn that and start draining some coolant. I should mention it's a good idea to take the radiator cap off. That way it drains easier. I guess I can try to do this by hand first without using pliers. And that turns really easily, so I can actually remove this without the pliers. And hopefully this will start draining out soon before I take this all the way out. Looks like maybe there's a rubber seal in there that should be attached to this valve. And if I pull it to this side, I can see coolant starting to leak out from this valve, but it's not going through the hose. So I've got the other end of the hose in a catch pan right underneath where I'm at right now, just in case I take this all the way out and coolant starts flowing out, then I'll at least catch some of it. So either that port is blocked or my hose is not attached correctly, because I have that all the way out and it's leaking straight out of this valve. So I'm not really sure why it's not going through this hose, but that'll get some coolant out one way or another. So I put my catch pan where most of the coolant's dripping at, and I guess I'll just do this way. I would have liked to have done this a little cleaner than this, but it could be worse. Really don't know why it's not coming through that hose though. So I can watch the level as it goes down inside the radiator. So I'll just watch until I can't really see the level anymore, or until my catch pan fills up. It's starting to slow down a little bit, so I could probably go ahead and close this valve. I'm sure that's probably good enough. I still don't know why it didn't come through that hose. So now I'll just tighten this back up. And that is one way to drain the coolant on this truck. A lot of good that hose was. So hopefully you guys have better luck with that spout on that petcock than I did. But now I can start removing these 2 bolts on the thermostat housing. These are 14mm bolts. There's one on this side. And this one over here has a ground connection to it, and it's got a nut on top of that. And this nut would be 14mm if the guy I bought this from didn't paint this engine with super thick paint. I like that he did, so I'm not mad about it, but I really got to push this socket down to get on there. And now hopefully I can fit an extension here where I won't have to take off this air cleaner. I'll try this 5-inch extension first. That feels like it's going to be fine. And I'll go ahead and take that nut off first. I want to make sure that electrical connection doesn't get twisted up. It's pretty much seized onto that nut. So I'd really like to not put as much pressure on that as I can. It's twisting up pretty bad as I turn this. You can see it a little bit better right there. It is just turning with that nut. So I might need to get a thin wrench on that bottom nut, and that way I can separate these two nuts and get that electrical connector off. So my normal 14mm wrench is too long to fit in here. I thought about using a crow's foot, but the only one I have is 13, so that's not going to fit there. But luckily 14mm is close to 9/16, and I have this standard thin wrench set that has a 9/16 on it that's pretty short and can fit in here. So I'll link that wrench set in the description too in case you need something like this. But that lets me hold on to that bottom nut and try to get this top nut separated from it. And those are stuck together really well with that paint. So I'm going to tighten this back up and see if I can break that nut loose from that electrical connector. And then I'll loosen it back up and see if I've got them separated. And I don't, but this socket feels like it's slipping on that nut, so I'm going to hammer this down to get it seated on there better. It's pretty crazy how thick that paint is, but I guess that's a good thing. And maybe that'll loosen up that connection too. And I see a bunch of rust on my gold wrench, so that's good news. Maybe it's just rust welded together. And that is really on there. So I don't know what else to do. I might just keep going and see if I can just break this one way or another. I can always replace that connector, but I really don't want to do that if I don't have to. So here's another look at the setup that I've got going on here. I can tighten this up and get this wrench wedged on this support bracket, but all that's doing is tightening the nut down onto that electrical connector. My 9/16 thin wrench did not work on that bottom nut. It's just slipping off of it. So really at this point, all I can do is just keep loosening it and tightening it again and seeing if that's going to do anything. Try the 9/16 one more time because that seems to be the best solution. And in doing that, all I did was snap that electrical connector, so I'll need to replace that. But the good news there is now I can take this out. And I can show you that those two were rusted together pretty well, so that was not coming apart. It has a serrated washer on the bottom side of that top nut, and that is likely why this wouldn't budge. I did get some pretty good bite marks on there where I rounded off this nut trying to get that apart. But I guess the good news is we got the first bolt out. I'll replace that electrical connector after I get the housing out. That way I've got more room to work with. I will go ahead and brush this off. That way I can get some PV blaster in here. I can't imagine why we tightened it down so tight, but that's what we did. And then we painted over it with this engine paint. Engine does look nice, so I like that they did that. But stuff like this is a pain when you go to repair it. So I can fix this. I'll do that later. I'll let it sit in some PV blaster maybe overnight. And now I can get that other bolt out. So this one shouldn't be too difficult to get off. Should be able to use my battery ratchet. There we go, broke it loose. And that one is out of there too. There we go. It's got some kind of bracket on it that goes from one side to the other, and that bracket actually holds this whole thing down that was getting in my way of getting a wrench in here. So it looks like you could release this from this bracket, and that might give you a little bit more room to get a wrench in here. I doubt it would help much though, because that bracket's still going to be there, but that may make it a little bit easier. So I'll move that out of the way for now, and I can go ahead and break this connection free and see if I got my coolant level where I wanted it. So there's still a little bit of coolant right there, but that was being stopped up because the thermostat's closed. And it looks like there is absolutely no gasket in between the housing and the block. So that's pretty interesting. It looks like somebody just RTV'd this thermostat in here, but I can't imagine that would hold this down that tight. So maybe it's not RTV, I don't know. Sure looked like it in the beginning. So I think I just need some big pliers to grab on this thermostat and pull it out. There we go. And I misjudged my coolant level, so there's still coolant right there, but that's okay. I'm gonna drain some more coolant from the petcock so that this level goes down. So I'm gonna try to clean this without getting as much down in that coolant as I can. But luckily there isn't a bunch of gasket material stuck to this surface, so I guess that's the good news. Normally I start with a plastic razor blade, but since this area down here doesn't really seal much on the top side, I'm gonna go at this with a metal razor blade, scrape some of this junk out of here. There really isn't a lot, it's just a little dirty, but the surface is actually pretty clean. I still cannot understand why there was no gasket here, yet it wasn't leaking. But I will put a gasket in here when I put the thermostat in, because I just don't trust this not having a gasket. I may live to regret that, but now I can compare my thermostats and make sure they match before I put the new one in. So the gasket on the old thermostat looks pretty rough, and that is probably where my leak came from. Actually, it's the only place my leak could have come from. So the fact that I thought that it was RTV, but it's actually the gasket, says that it's in pretty bad shape, and I'm almost certain that that is where the leak came from. It was a small leak, so it really wasn't bad. A lot of it leaked over time, and finally got to the point where it was low enough that I lost heat at a stoplight. And the new one looks the same. It looks the same size. The old one's pretty corroded, but everything looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and install this one. I'm going to put this gasket on top of it, and this will mate with the thermostat and the thermostat housing. So before I put the new thermostat in, I do want to clean this up as much as I can. So I'm going to go at this with a Scotch-Brite pad just to clean this area up as much as I can. I'll try to avoid getting material down in the coolant, but as long as I can clean this up just a little bit, make it look a little bit better, I'll at least feel better. So I'm going to call that good enough. There's a little bit of dust down on the top of that coolant level, but that's okay. So the old thermostat has 54 millimeters on it. It's also got USA. The only difference with the new one is it does say 54 millimeters, but it doesn't say USA. So maybe GM's making these somewhere else now, but at least we know this is actually the same size. So this is definitely going to work. I'll fit this down in here and it should sit right in here nicely, which it does. So that's good. I guess with it sitting in there like that, it really doesn't need a gasket. I'm still going to put this new gasket in here because I can't imagine it's going to hurt anything, but it does fit in here nicely. I like the way it sits. So I am going to use this. So now that I'm ready to put that housing back on top, I need to figure out how to get this nut off of this bolt. There is my broken off electrical connector, so I'll need to get a new one in there. I got the bottom nut, which is actually the head of the bolt, wedged into my 14 millimeter wrench. So now I can just try to break this nut off and hopefully get the electrical connector out of the space in between the two. So we'll see how that goes. So I'm really only going to get one shot at getting this nut off without rounding this off even worse. So I'd like to try putting the nut into my vise. That's going to give me the most clamping pressure, and then hopefully I can just turn my wrench and break it loose. I really need to make sure this wrench is on there as good as I can get it. And then my biggest fear at this point is rounding this nut off even worse. But that is really on there. So I'll get my wrench on here in a different spot where I can pull it instead of pushing. That'll give me a better chance of breaking this free. So I'll get it seated on there the best I can. Make sure my vise is tight, and then hopefully break this nut loose. And it's not budging, so I may need to heat it up. All right, plan B, I'm gonna heat this up. So the good news about having it in my vise is I don't have to worry about putting an open flame here. I can just torch this till the cows come home, and then hopefully that'll loosen it up. I should probably go ahead and get my wrench off of here so that I don't heat that up. And so I'll just switch between heat and PB blaster, let that soak in there, burn it some more, and keep going back and forth until I can get my wrench on there and knock that right off. So I'm gonna let that soak for a while, and then I'll come back and try it again. And I took a pizza break. I'm ready to go back at it. I'm gonna heat it and soak it in some PB blaster one more time. And now I'll try one more time with this wrench. There we go. I at least got it to break free, so now I can turn it back and forth just to loosen it up. And at some point, this should start getting easier to turn. And I've loosened it up enough where that electrical connector is loose. So the threads on that nut are just rusted into the threads on this bolt. But I can keep turning this and get it out. Put some more PB blaster in to help. Apologize for the bad lighting. I am doing this in a recessed corner of my garage that has pretty poor lighting. So I'll get this all the way off and see how bad those threads look. I can also replace this whole bolt, but I looked it up and it's $17. But I'll link that in the description in case you guys want to get a new bolt. So there we go. I got it out. The threads don't really look too bad. There's my broken electrical connector, and the nut actually doesn't look too bad, so I may just reuse this. So I don't like the idea of reusing this bolt as much as I rounded it off, but I don't want to spend 17 bucks on this and wait a couple days for it to come. Some good news is I found a nut that threads on here just fine, so I can at least use a new nut. And believe it or not, I am going to reuse this grounding washer. So all I need to do now is repair my wiring damage. I've got this wiring terminal that will fit over the screw, and so now I've just got to see if I can find a way to get both of those wires in here and get it crimped down tight enough where it's going to hold. I got this connector out of a terminal kit that I have. I actually hadn't opened it, so I don't know what I bought it for originally, but I will link this in the description in case you want to use the same terminal. It's the biggest one in the kit, but it's the only one that fits over this screw. So I'm going to cut this old connector off, strip these wires back a little bit, and crimp down that connector onto them. I'm just using a regular set of wire crimpers. I'm going to leave as much room for myself as I can. Try to move this hose out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. I never know how to gauge the size of the wire, so I usually just start with the biggest one and move my way down until it actually bites onto it. And this looks to be 14 gauge wire. So I'll strip both of these back, and now I can attempt to crimp this down on top of these. I will twist these wires together just a little bit, and I'll have my wire sticking out just a little bit, and then just crimp it down. And that looks absolutely awful. So that looks pretty terrible. It does not feel like a super tight connection, so I'm going to try one more time. Clamp it down a little bit tighter, and that feels like it might be good enough. So I'm gonna run with that. I can tug on the wires from the back and feel that they're not coming back out. So I think that's gonna be good enough. I'm second guessing myself with this gasket because the thermostat gasket is sitting down in there really well. So to put this on top would have a gasket on top of a gasket, and that sounds like a bad idea. But since I already bought it, and I bought it a while ago, so I know I can't return it, I want to use it and see how it does. So I'm going to try it and see if it leaks. One way or another, I'll leave a comment in the description and let you guys know whether or not that worked. So the last thing I need to do is clean up this side of the mating surface. It's a little rough. It's got a ring left where the thermostat gasket was. So I'll start with some Scotch-Brite and see if that cleans all that off. And that did a pretty good job by itself. So I think this is going to be good enough. I could always use some sandpaper, but I think this is going to clean it up good enough. I sprayed some brake cleaner on a towel. I'm just going to clean this off and see what it looks like. And that doesn't look great, so I'm going to take my Carbide scraper to it and see if that helps smooth this out just a little bit. I'm going at it pretty light at first just to see if it'll get rid of all that. And I can always go at it harder later if I need to. Go at it one more time with the Scotch-Brite, and that feels a lot smoother, so I think that's going to be good. I'll clean it off one more time with the brake cleaner, and then I'm going to call that good enough. So it doesn't look like it removed all that, but it feels smooth, so I think that's good enough. So I'll set this on top of the gasket, and I'll need to get this bracket back on top before I put the bolts in. So I'll have to put that back first, and then line up the bolts through there, and make sure that they go through the gasket, and then I can start threading it in. So I'll do the same with this one over here. I'm not gonna put the nut or the other washers and the electrical connector on this just yet. I first wanna make sure I can get this lined up and get the bolts started. So if I lift up on the housing and the gasket, I can get that bolt started a lot easier, and then I can push back down on them as I tighten it down. So now I'll use my battery ratchet and get this side tightened down. And I'm gonna stop there, move to the other side and get this side tightened down too. The gasket feels good. I can feel it sticking out on both sides, so I think that's good. So before I get this electrical connector on there, I'm gonna torque these bolts down and then I'll get it on. I should mention that I get my torque specs from charm.li. It's a website with a bunch of repair manuals. It's got torque specs, it's got instructions on how to change out parts, but I find those torque specs to be better than things that I get on Google or even ChatGPT. So that's where I'm gonna get my torque specs for these. It's got repair manuals for basically any car older than 2013. So I like to use it for getting my torque specs. But according to that, my torque spec here is 21 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna run with that. And with those torqued down, I can get this electrical connector onto this post. I'm really hoping that crimp job is good enough, but it does look pretty sketchy. So I've got the ground washer on there. I'll get this nut started. And then I just wanna make sure as I tighten this down that it doesn't tighten that bolt down even more, since it's already torqued. So I'm gonna get my socket around it and see if I can turn it without turning that bolt. I'll go ahead and use my torque wrench on this, and that way I know if it gets tighter than 21 foot-pounds, this will at least click. There we go. So hopefully that nut is tight enough, and I shouldn't be able to move this, which I can't, so that's good news. So I'm hoping that that's tight enough. It doesn't look too bad now that it's in there. I just don't feel super confident in my crimp job there. So this feels like it's gonna hold. Everything looks good. This is solid. So I feel good about all that. So at this point, I'm ready to fill it with coolant and check and see if I have any leaks. So there's quite a bit of air burping out, which is good. So that's good. There's still some air burping out, but I can run the truck, make sure there's no leaks at the thermostat housing, and then I can top it off after that. Before I do, I'm just gonna use a towel and clean up all of that coolant that's down in there. I've even got some down here now. So I need to clean all that up, that way I can tell if I actually have a leak at the end. So I'll get down here the best I can and try to soak some of that up, but it's kind of all over the place now, and it's not the easiest place to get to with the towel. Maybe able to use compressed air and just blow it out, but then I'm just gonna blow it all over the engine. But that's probably the best I can do at this point. Now it's at least dry enough around the housing that I'll be able to tell if there's a leak there. Topped off the coolant one more time, so it is absolutely full. So now I can go ahead and start the truck and make sure that there's no leaks. Looks good so far. While the engine's cold, I am topping it off with some coolant, and I'll watch all these air bubbles come out, and then I'll just keep topping it off from there before it gets hot. All right, no leaks so far, and the coolant is topped off, so I'm good there. I just need to wait for the thermostat to open. I put my vents on defrost on high, that way it'll pull some coolant into the heater core too. And now I'll just wait for it to get up to temperature. All right, I got it up to operating temperature. It jumped a little bit above that and then dropped right back down to where it's at now. So I know the thermostat opened up and the housing looks bone dry. So I think we're good there. I'll let it cool off. I'll top off the coolant and then I'll just check that periodically through the next couple of days. But so far it looks like I fixed my coolant leak. So here are the tools I used. I will link all of this in the description. But for now, it looks like I fixed the coolant leak, so that's great. So that's it for this video, guys. Drop a comment and let me know if you know why the valve on the radiator wouldn't leak out of the spout. Is 2 gaskets a terrible idea? Are you guys running a different thermostat on your truck? This one's a 195. I know there's others out there. Let me know where you guys get your torque specs. And subscribe if you want to see what else I'm doing on my truck. I've done a lot already, from suspension to exhaust and some body stuff. I've done some things under the hood, belt, alternator. I got new wheels, which I'm still in love with, and there's plenty more to do to this truck. So let me know what you guys want to see next, and I will catch you guys in the next video.